Don't get mad. They're right. Don't get mad. Yeah, Kaylee was just home. She just left on Friday. She left on Friday morning to go to a Pi Phi party, and she just bought a brand new Range Rover, and she contemplated all day long back and forth whether she should go home, and because she just really wanted to show it to Maddie, and some other friends and whatnot. And she's just like, Mom, I'm gonna go to the Pi Phi party, and Maddie's got to see this my new ride. And I'm like, for sure. Like, I mean, it was nice.
It reads very bizarre.
We're going to jump off today by talking about the ambiguous and partial DNA profile of Bryan Kohberger. Recently, someone on Reddit attempted to discredit Becca Barlow. I'd go as far as to say kind of make fun of her and claim that she's not an expert on DNA at all. Alright, there's a couple of things wrong with this person's argument, including the fact that they are wrong about their interpretation overall. And look at that title, robust and full. Even if it weren't incomplete and partial, as we know from the paperwork, adding robust and full is sort of like adding facts you don't have. So after undermining Barlow, they make the argument that this is actually about the Hernandez case. Now, there are a few problems wrong with interpreting it as the Hernandez case. In legal writing, a conclusion that ends with a clear citation indicates that the writer is moving on. It's like clarity at the end of a case analysis. Like, okay, I'm done with this. Here's where you can reference it. Although this Redditor keeps alleging that it's in the same paragraph as the Hernandez information. For one, it's not even on the same page. Two, I think this person is possibly confusing paragraphs with the subsections in the writing, because it's clearly another paragraph, which you can see with the 5-character indentation. She's drawing on the Hernandez case to bring up the fact that IgG information is and should always be considered Brady information, meaning that the prosecuting attorney should have to share it with defense attorneys. Now, she ends that, again, with a clear citation noting she's done discussing the Hernandez case, and each time that she shifts back into talking about Kohberger, she uses "and in this case" in the present tense. She actually does this 10 times during the document, and each and every time she uses "and in this case," she's referring to the Kohberger case. Ironically, this Reddit user notes that lots of lies get perpetuated, and they are with this very post, because there was like 100 comments, and really no one called her out on it, or him out on it, and everyone seemed to think it was great work. You can kind of see that the person's a little bit over-invested in it as far as I'm concerned, because of the way they get so upset at someone telling them they're wrong, and they actually start hurling insults and saying this person isn't a very good paragraph discerner, although the person's correct. This Redditor is wrong, dead-ass wrong, considering that they add a bunch of robust and completeness to facts that we don't have. But I do think a lot of it is through like normal misinterpretation. Not everyone understands legal writing. But if you were confused, please note the 10 times that she shifts to the present tense, and in this case, she means Kohberger. And in fact, during the paragraphs that she uses in this case, I think there's only 2 of them out of 10 times that she doesn't actually use Bryan Kohberger's name in that paragraph to, yet again, give us a little bit of decisiveness about our interpretation. This is indeed about Kohberger, and each and every time in this case is about Kohberger. Quote, in this case, unquote. End quote. I always say unquote instead of end quote. Doesn't matter. I don't know, and I don't have time to care. Closing up with, yet again, reference citations legally help to rid ourselves of any obfuscation that may come from the fact that oftentimes legal writings are citing other cases to lead into why they are relevant in the case being litigated at that moment. This is indeed an ambiguous and partial DNA profile we're talking about. Now, whenever we get into the word ambiguous, whenever it pertains to DNA, that typically refers to a sample that originates from a mixture. So this person cites the Hernandez case in order to continue this misinterpretation, stating that it must be belonging to Hernandez because there is no mixed profile in Bryan Kohberger's case, or there is no partial profile because they so obviously, biasly want it to be robust and complete with no facts to actually back that up. Now, here's the thing. When we're talking about a single source profile, I think that it's not really this user's fault either here, because that does get a bit confusing, and here's why. All right, well, touch DNA typically does wind up with mixtures. If you're interpreting touch DNA, it's usually originated from a mixture. This presents a unique challenge to forensic scientists, and mixed samples are often limited. But the DNA collected from touch DNA is minimal and degraded already, so further contamination by another DNA source bangs head against wall. As a result, the analysis might only yield partial profiles, which are more difficult to match conclusively to an individual. This ambiguity in touch DNA interpretation demands caution and recognizing the limitations in that particular approach, particularly in high-stakes legal contexts such as the death penalty. But the situation highlights the advanced forensic techniques that are used here. And here's the thing where it comes to that interpretation. In a case where a comparison, in the case of a mixed sample, you would have scientists trying to interpret that sample, and the analysis techniques used allow for the possibility that scientists are able to identify each profile in the mixture. This can result in the terminology shifting from that sample, referring to it as a mixed sample, because now it's been interpreted and separated in a sense, and it has now become your single source male profile. I mean, there's no other way to refer to it once scientists have successfully isolated and identified DNA from one individual within the mixed sample. It's permanently referred to as their single source profile. Even if the identification process involved complex analysis like principal component analysis and the identity of the DNA belonging to a male individual from a mixture, there is no other way to refer to it. So either way, even if you pull a profile from a mixed sample, it's still going to be considered a single source male profile. In reports and discussions, that's just the terminology and the way that it works. So the fact that this person has used single source profile, that is technically not really their fault. I could see why you would think that the single source doesn't pertain to any mixture, and it wouldn't if you couldn't separate the mixture or interpret the individuals from the mixture. There is some recent development in DNA evolution that actually allows this process to be a bit easier for scientists, called the direct single cell subsampling, but that's probably too nerdy for anyone to care about. Moral of the story, you isolate the DNA from individual cells and you overcome the limitations of traditional methods and the precision of this analysis, allowing you to identify separate profiles, single sources within a mixed sample. This, of course, can enhance the accuracy of any matches that you get afterward. But, of course, it does confuse the fact that, of course, your interpretation would be different possibly from the scientist sitting next to you. And speaking of scientists, this person totally tries to put Becca Barlow down as not a DNA expert. She's a DNA attorney, which is a dual expertise, and it can really help in the interpretation and the translation of like why all this scientific stuff matters in the legal realm. Like you hear even the judge asking things like, okay, so let's say that FBI did go around the rules and they didn't follow the law and they broke the law while they were completing the IGG investigation. What does that mean? Well, obviously someone who has this dual expertise could easily explain that to him. And I don't mean to like be mean to this person at all, though I'm sure they hate me. But like it did make me kind of like, wow, you know, they really, really need to debunk that because it's huge. And I mean, luckily, Becca Barlow's filing was written well enough that we have 10, I repeat, 10 instances of why we are making this interpretation at least somewhat more close to compare it to someone who is saying that it was about Hernandez, because it's clearly not. And of course, I found during this person's thread while I was reading that they don't even believe it's touch, and in fact refer to the touch DNA as if, and even if it were touch, but it absolutely is touch. Prosecuting attorney has not come back and objected one time to the reference of it being touch DNA. And we do have that in the paperwork and in the case canon facts of this case. It's touch DNA. And Barlow has 200 cases that she has worked involved in investigative genetic genealogy work in the criminal, procedural, and litigation game. I mean, she is no noob, and she's certainly still a DNA expert. I hate it when people limit people's field of work like that. Let's take, medical child abuse, which I'm working on in another series right now on my channel. There are multiple ways to come at Munchausen by proxy or medical child abuse, and there are lots of different experts that are involved, including research experts, medical experts, legal experts, psychological, etc., etc. That was my really long way of saying, you guys, it's fucking partial and fucking ambiguous. It most likely came from mixed DNA that they found on the sheath, which, by the way, I noticed a lot of people saying, well, why didn't they find it on the sheath? And possibly they did. But the sheath itself and any DNA found on it would certainly be a mixture. I mean, it's almost impossible to have originally had a single source DNA profile on the sheath at all because it's made up of bovine DNA. So that's where we have the fact that they claim they found this on a button. But again, as we just discussed, it possibly didn't negate the fact that it was a mixture to be interpreted in the first place. And this would completely explain why ISP couldn't pull a single source profile out of it, and they sent it to the FBI and Othram Labs to do their own profiling and own analysis in order to get that difficult source profile to work with in the first place. Do you guys realize how fucking rare this crime is? I mean, statistically, it's like seriously rare. It's a stranger murder, allegedly. It's a 1 perp versus 4 victims, so it's a multiple murder by one perpetrator in the home of the victims by a stranger. So stranger killings may not be terribly, terribly rare, but they mostly happen away from the home. Homicides related to burglary or other instances where the perpetrator actually breaks into the home are really, really rare. Not to mention that most stranger crimes are committed against males. So again, we have a ×3 rarity when it comes to the 3 female victims because most people killed by strangers are killed away from the home, and most of them will be males. Most women are killed by acquaintances or someone in their family or someone they've had a relationship in the past or present with. I remember Bill Thompson highlighting originally in this case that he was aware, obviously, what the defense was going for was the allegation that the state reverse engineered its case and through either contamination, bad interpretation, or possibly even planting the DNA at the crime scene and on the knife sheath, as defense said, just waiting for investigators to find. And considering the S&P profile has probably traveled more than Kohberger's traveled in his life, it's pretty nuts that they're not wanting to show what they did with this profile and that there's actually an FBI copy, an Othram Lab copy, and the fact that it wasn't directly compared to Kohberger. And as has been noted many times in the case, you can't compare IgG with the same profile that you're going to put into CODIS because it doesn't work that way. And also what was noticed by Barlow was that prosecution's fallacy was used here where they put a percentage on the match between allegedly Bryan's dad and the S&P profile that the investigators were working with. They claimed that there was a certain percentage of a match when really what they're doing here is being unable to exclude you from this group of people, and especially without showing us the group that they're working with. Like, are they using 23andMe? Are they using Ancestry? What database are they using and how large is it? That would be a considerable thing to leave out when you're trying to match a DNA profile, and especially when you're trying to hook it with a percentage. Like, you guys, it's octillionth, blah, 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 like there's practically no effing way that it's not him type shit. It's impossible to do here without telling us the size of your database. At the time, apparently defense attorneys didn't even know which databases the investigators had actually used in order to come to this conclusion, and it was probably a number thrown out there prejudicially to Kohberger. Been over years since the crimes have occurred, and we've just simply needed to be reminded of some of the things from the beginning of this case. And, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of narrative around the crime that it's like normal, well, not normal, but that it's like the most unconfusing, simplest, unambiguous crime between a stranger, a psycho who just wanted to kill 4 people with absolutely no motive and no connection to them and no previous health-related concerns, a career ahead of him. He's attempting to obtain his doctoral degree, applying to work for law enforcement, etc., etc. It appears he would have no reason to just decide he wanted to kill, but that is the main narrative. But people get super miffed if people include that it had anything to do with anything super secretive before the murders. They indicate everything is secretive because of the gag order, which is not true. And everyone forgets that the Supreme Court was like, yo, this ain't really our job, and you were supposed to ask John Judge first, but this is a broad-ass gag order. You guys should check yourself before you wreck yourself. And that was the Idaho Supreme Court. I hear that's no easy crowd. Word on the street. But moral of the story was that they all say that it's a super normal crime, and basically that there's nothing to look at. But early on, we have the estates of Kaylee Goncalves and Maddie Mogen suing University of Idaho, Moscow City Police Department, FBI, and any related agencies for somehow causing, whether through negligence, failure to act, failure to inform, failure to protect, causing the murders of Maddie and Kaylee. Now, they're not suing them in case they don't solve the crimes. I actually think I've heard Shannon Grace say something similar to that, and it's totally bullshit. He's just negating to answer the actual question of what they were suing for, which thus far has been kept out of the public eye. Well, I mean, we'd see a whole lot of cases if it were just for pure negligence to solve the crime. This is obviously, and more importantly, legally, it's referring to something before the murders to have caused the death of these 2 girls. It's not for something afterwards. It's not a just in case you do something later to sue for. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, you're not exactly bound by timelines as far as it pertains to something that hasn't happened yet, if that makes sense. So that's why I'm still and will probably forever remain suspicious of the grub truck video, especially since we know controlled buys and other things go down in that area of town with the Quad Cities Task Force. These lawsuits sealed the deal for me. I can't negotiate this in my brain as anything pertaining to normality of these crimes. And again, legally, it has to pertain to something before the murders. So how were the police negligent in Maddie and Kaylee's deaths? That's what I want to know. Now, if it were normal to sue them for lack of preservation of evidence, I totally get the drift. It's typically not, but wow, these guys make the Keystone Cops look good. And that's a part of the most annoying narrative ever to me. Here's this fucking corrupt police force, and people act like it's only conspiracy theorists that's like, hey, you know what? I better make Moscow PD show their work. They've been known to not only not show their work, but to actually tamper with their work, hide their work, and not disclose their work. Or, you know, in the case of the mattresses and many other forensic areas of this crime, to just not do the damn work. It took over 3 days for the police to even communicate with the public at all about these crimes. And they release a statement, and originally we don't even get the names of the victims. 3 days later, they come out and they're asking for the public's help, gathering surveillance footage about a week later instead of on that 3rd day. It seems like on that 3rd day, when they finally addressed the public, they'd have been like, yo, check your videos. But it's a whole nother week before we see that. And damn if it's not 6 weeks before they're moving bloody mattresses out. And they've got some kind of red liquid there on that day. So I'm not sure what exactly I think about this, but I know there's something going on. What that something is, I don't know. Welcome to Kohberger versus Idaho. They waited a little over a week to actually tow the victims' cars out of the yard, and whenever they actually take them to store them, they're stored in this snowy parking lot. People were actually seen having trouble, you know, scraping all the snow off in order to crank the cars whenever the family members go to pick them back up. And compounding this issue, there's this huge 8-hour delay before anyone finds the victims of this crime. Then there's another 5-hour delay from the time that the cops get there to the time that the coroner, the only lady in Moscow who has any experience at all with Murders, allegedly, according to their government there, that she would be the only one to have any type of expertise. But she was like, you know what? Nah, y'all go ahead and finish that forensic shit, and then I'm going to head on out. So we have delayed reporting, delayed coroner, and then, of course, remember that time that the coroner got slammed on TV because she was like, oh, an autopsy is not really going to matter. Hello, they were stabbed. And something else that there seems to be a lot of confusion on, just because this case is international or national does not mean that it's not going to help Kohberger to get it switched out of this prejudicial county. This is a prejudicial county for Kohberger. The end, period, point blank. There are so many areas for concern, I don't even know where to start. The alumni, everybody being of the graduating class of the University of Idaho. And get this, while everyone's like, oh, he can totally get a fair trial in Moscow, the court clerk is married to Chief Fry, the lead investigator of this crime. So she's filling out paperwork that's completely sealed from any and everyone, sometimes even defense attorneys, even though it's about their client. Sometimes they can't even see the things that the court clerk can see, and she's able to run that all home to Chief Fry. And by the way, she's a lot cuter than I was expecting her to be, and I hope that Chief Fry treats her well. And, hopefully she's not doing anything like that and she's ethically handling her job. But if I were his defense attorney, I would have already asked that she be removed from the court clerk in this case. Then we have Kathy Maybew. What? I already talked about her and got off of the subject. Okay, well, back to the subject. She is a public defender for Latah County. She also works in private defense and she's the coroner. She was like a nurse for 20 years before being elected to the coroner. And the only reason that things like this are allowed to go on in Idaho is because notoriously, Idaho has no ethical oversight boards that prevent them from doing so. And it takes a lot more effort to even have someone above her look at the situation for the obvious conflict. I don't even see how it would be debatable whether the coroner in a county would have a conflict with being a criminal defense attorney. That makes no sense to me. Speaking of conflict, it's everywhere in this case. We have Kathy, the coroner. We have Julie, the court clerk. We have the fact that the police and the lead investigators were kind of stalking out the residents before the crimes even happened. And it's going to come all the way up, baby, all the way up to defense attorneys in this case, which are also conflict attorneys. I probably mentioned this before, but it's one of my pet peeves to see people say, no, there wasn't a conflict. No, there was certainly indeed a conflict. An attorney's not going to drop one client because there is no conflict. There was absolutely no confusion, a conflict. However, Bryan did waive that conflict and the judge allowed him to. What a lot of people were bitching about was that, Kohberger's not supposed to know all of the technical criminal procedure and law concerning his case, and judges could override him. And in this case, I kind of have to agree. I think that I don't think that he should have been allowed to waive this particular thing. But the coalition behind Defense Counsel for Death Penalty Trials in Idaho, it's a cooked egg. There is another conflict here, and that is with prosecuting attorney serving on the board that is the administrative hand that delves into and delves out the defense attorney's money for death penalty cases. So not only is he on the board that helps decide which pool of attorneys can actually join that group, but he's on the administrative board that's actually going to pay the funds to his suspect's attorneys. He's going to be the one helping to oversee Ann Taylor's pay through the defense fund in the state, which is actually a private fund help to alleviate the county's burden when it comes to funding such a thing. Conflict. I'd be really surprised if it didn't get switched out of the county. Although I was really surprised about when Ann did it because she just told us she really wasn't ready for this yet. And in fact, Bill Thompson keeps talking about how they should only have the trial during the summer, and everything he was really talking about naturally kind of went back accidentally to venue change. And when the judge mentions that, because it sounds like what he's talking about is venue, but he was actually discussing the scheduling hearing, not a venue hearing, even though that's what it sounded like, because it's what it should have been. Did that make sense? Okay. So Ann stated that she still had a lot of work she was ready to do for that. And I've been surprised that they hadn't already gotten to this voir dire in this phase where they were already sending prospective jurors questionnaires so that they could kind of get the idea. But obviously, she knew they were going to venue change before that even happened. But it's like a gamble as to when you do it. And I mean, I think something happened here that made Anne go ahead and pull the trigger, because that was not a particularly well planned and orchestrated motion. There was no reason why, other than legal strategy, that she would have had to wait or put that off. Like in that particular motion, she acted like there was like all this work she was going to put into it with exhibits, and she might do that in the future. Prosecuting attorneys are going to object. I'm sure they will, and then she'll have to start showing that work. But it seemed like, bam, 1 second she's like, I'm not ready, and the next second, boom, here we go. So that's going to go to the director at the Supreme Court. They're going to decide where we're going to have this trial at. And it's going to be a while because, prosecuting attorneys have been ordered to hand over defense things by compelling them. And I mean, it's kind of rare to have to just straight up force the prosecuting attorney to give disclosure. And in a court case where judge is telling Anne, Taylor, that she has to kind of trust prosecuting attorneys here, with prosecuting attorneys damn well knowing that they have one of the leads in the case in their pocket, and they're going, nope, we're not going to give it to you because we're not going to bring it up at trial. All right, sorry if this is boring, but I totally have to bring this up because someone tried cussing me out last week, like, oh, maybe if you would read the case, you would understand how they got to the lead. Like, no, maybe if you would study criminal procedure, you would understand that Anne is finally attacking some of the poisonous fruit argument and pointing out that there is no direct lead to their suspect. Now, this is where it comes in that people claim that we're all pro-burgers and, we're happy enough to dissect the evidence piece by piece and we won't take it as a whole. Well, that's a short-sighted complaint because the evidence in this case is indeed interdependent. There's a misidentification of Kohberger's car. There is an IGG lead that was being hidden. And here's the thing. The Justice Department has entered an interim order, and it demands that the police have more than just IGG and to have corroborating evidence in order to hone in on a suspect through investigative genealogy work. As has been highlighted by the experts brought to this case through the defense attorneys for Kohberger, police are supposed to use this as a last resort, but often they skirt other types of investigation work altogether. And I think a lot of the times they are hoping solely that the DNA is going to do their work for them. And in this case, it's just not going to be stout enough. And the fact that IGG, through the Justice Department interim order, through the law, is supposed to have another lead. And in this case, this lead was misidentified and appears to be reverse engineered to Kohberger. It doesn't even appear to be. It just is. I mean, the cast investigator changed the identity of the car through the year and make of the car after Kohberger was arrested. In fact, I think he did it March 2023, if I'm not mistaken. I don't have it in front of me right now. But it was a while after Kohberger was arrested for these crimes, and that's not going to cut it. That's not going to fly. And cast information doesn't matter without the sheath DNA. A cell phone location, whether it was connected to a Moscow tower or not, doesn't matter without the other interdependent links of so-called evidence in this case. So, I mean, the fact that we would get made fun of for just stating, it simply does not have enough legs is weird. And so many things in this case are weird. It's just fitting right in there. To add insult to injury, you're not supposed to surreptitiously obtain DNA with IGG, especially with no other leads. And you're supposed to actually obtain consent from any donors or samples. They, of course, didn't do that, and they didn't do any of the normal investigative work that police do to solve crimes in this murder, right? They went to IGG, and then they arrested Kohberger, and they were donated $1 million. They told everyone what a complicated case this was, and they still are talking about this complicated case. And, I mean, it's not that complicated, you guys, just because of the 50 gigs of data. I know that both attorneys have used that in their defenses, but a lot of that, and probably, God, I'd go as far as to say 9 times out of 10, most of that is surveillance evidence from the video canvassing, and probably a lot of it doesn't even have anything to do with Kohberger, and it's not actually going to be utilized during the trial, but everything is supposed to be turned over in discovery, so they could get pretty large, even though like 3 gigabytes of it is at your actual disposal when it comes to actually arguing or litigating the crimes. Geez, I cannot believe that I've already recorded 30 minutes worth of audio. Did I even make a point? I hope so. Thanks for hanging out, though. So I'll just end this by stating all of those tips that Moscow begged for weeks with that $1 million that was donated to solve this complicated crime where a perpetrator allegedly left his DNA on a sheath beneath one of the victims, okay? That kind of complicated. They beg for tips, tell the parents that they can't put up any more flyers, all types of other suspicious shit, and then they didn't even chronicle or categorize the tips that came in. The tips were in no order. The tips were just notes strewn throughout discovery. I mean, I've seen a lot of Keystone investigations, and I've literally never seen the police department not at least alphabetize the tips. Alphabetize, like at the least, right? And I mean, we're talking having FBI join the case, et cetera, and no one is attempting to group these tips into their correct or pertinent orders. Please keep calling in those tips, you guys. We're not going to use them, but keep calling them in. Makes the public feel better.
The community of Moscow and people around the country sit and wait for answers about how and why police zeroed in on Kohberger.
I'm not stupid. Don't play dumb games with me. I'd rather deal with this as a noise complaint than getting a hold of the Greek council and the Greek board and all of that, and seeing the students and playing all these stupid fucking games.
I don't know.
Because I guarantee you there's a lot of underage drinking because they left their alcohol behind.
Also go contact them because it was non-specific. Sure. And if I'm warning them, I better go fucking warn them too.
True. And that's the bottom row of the house there?
For answers. Well, now we're not going to be getting much, or if any, of those answers from anyone involved with the case.
It's been me and the families pushing that agenda, and that's been really difficult.
Trying to pigeonhole our investigation into the suspect lives in the area. We wanted to make sure that we covered all the bases.
When your child dies, they don't just die once. They die every time that you wake up